Last class, I started with Freud, and I want to turn to Skinner. And the story of Skinner and science is somewhat different from the story of Freud. Freud developed and championed the theory of psychoanalysis by himself. It is as close as you could find in science to a solitary invention. Obviously, he drew upon all sorts of sources and predecessors, but psychoanalysis is identified as Freud's creation. Behaviorism is different. Behaviorism is a school of thought that was there long before Skinner, championed by psychologists like John Watson, for instance. Skinner came a bit late into this, but the reason why we've heard of Skinner and why Skinner's so well known is he packaged these notions. He expanded upon them, he publicized them, he developed them scientifically and presented them both to the scientific community and to the popular community. And sociologically, in the 1960s and 1970s in the United States, behaviorism was incredibly well known, and so was Skinner. He was the sort of person you would see on talk shows. His books were bestsellers. Now, at the core of behaviorism are three extremely radical and interesting views. The first is a strong emphasis on learning. The strong view of behaviorism is everything you know, everything you are, is the result of experience. There's no real human nature. Rather, people are infinitely malleable. There's a wonderful quote from John Watson. And in this quote, John Watson is paraphrasing a famous boast by the Jesuits. The Jesuits used to claim, give me a child until the age of 7, and I'll show you the man. That they would take a child and turn him into anything they wanted. And Watson expanded on this boast. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train them to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chief, and yes, even beggar man and thief, regardless of his talents, pensions, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. Now, you could imagine, you could see in this a tremendous appeal to this view, because Watson is an extremely egalitarian view in a sense. If there's no human nature, then there's no sense in which one group of humans, by dint of their race or their sex, could be better than another group. And Watson was explicit. None of those facts about people will ever make any difference. What matters to what you are is what you learn and how you're treated. And so Watson claimed he could create anybody in any way simply by treating them in a certain fashion. A second aspect of behaviorism was anti-mentalism. And what I mean by this is the behaviorists were obsessed with the idea of doing science. And they felt, largely in reaction to Freud, that claims about internal mental states, like desires, wishes, goals, emotions, and so on, are unscientific. These invisible, vague things can never form the basis of a serious science. And so the behaviorist manifesto would then be to develop a science without anything that's unobservable, and instead use notions like stimulus and response and reinforcement and punishment and environment that refer to real world and tangible events. Finally, behaviorists believed there were no interesting differences across species. A behaviorist might admit that a human can do things that a rat or pigeon couldn't. But a behaviorist might just say, look, those are just general associative powers that differ. Or they may even deny it. They might say humans and rats aren't different at all. It's just humans tend to live in a richer environment than rats. From that standpoint, from that theoretical standpoint, comes a methodological approach, which is, if they're all the same, then you could study human learning by studying non-human animals. And that's a lot of what they did. Okay. I'm going to frame my introduction, my discussion of behaviorism, in terms of the three main learning principles that they argued can explain all of human mental life, all of human behavior. And then I want to turn to objections to behaviorism. But these three principles are powerful and very interesting. The first is habituation. This is the very simplest form of learning. And what this is technically described as a decline in a tendency to respond to stimuli that are familiar due to repeated exposure. Hey! Hey! The sudden noise startles. But as you hear it the second time, it startles less. Third time, it's just me being goofy. You get used to things. Now, and this of course is common enough in everyday life. We get used to the ticking of a clock or the noise of traffic. But it's actually a very important form of learning, because imagine life without it. Imagine life where you never got used to anything, where, you know, suddenly somebody steps forward and waves their hand, you go, "Ah," and then they wave their hand, go, "Ah," and you keep, and, you know, and there's a loud ticking of a clock, and you say, "Hmm." And, you know, that's not the way animals or humans work. You get used to things. And it's actually critically important to get used to things because it's a useful adaptive mechanism to keep track on new events and objects. It's important to notice something when it's new, because then you have to decide whether it's going to harm you, how to deal with it, to attend to it. But you can't keep on noticing it. And in fact, you should stop noticing it after it's been in an environment for long enough. So this counts as learning because it happens through experience. It's a way to learn through experience, to change your way of thinking through experience. And also it's useful because harmful stimuli are noticed. But when something has shown itself to be part of the environment, you don't notice it anymore. The existence of habituation is important for many reasons. One thing it's important for is clever developmental psychologists have used habituation as a way to study creatures who can't talk, like non-human animals and young babies. And when I talk on Wednesday about developmental psychology, I'll show different ways in which psychologists have used habituation to study the minds of young babies.